How aware do you think the crew are about the decarbonisation regulations, CII, for instance?
I do think there's actually a disconnect between why we have these regulations, the explanation to seafarers of the value that these regulations bring, and that disconnect really comes, I think, from, we've talked about it earlier, a bit of the blame game, that seafarers are continually, they're the ones reporting the data, so every time there's an error in the data that leads to a poor CII value, they're immediately getting an email, it could be at 3 o'clock in the morning their time, and they're suddenly having to deal with correcting the data, and that's becoming more and more of a full-time job almost. It's increasing the workload massively, and I think we've sort of talked about it in the last panel. That's where the digital solutions come in to help seafarers, so they're not having to do manual reporting in Excel and emailing them around the world. They can enter it in the system, it checks that the data's right, and that system helps to remind them that we're doing this as an industry to reach net zero, and this is the value that actually doing this reporting is bringing. But yeah, there's definitely a disconnect and a challenge there at the moment.
And you talked about that sense of mission, Simon, as well, that sort of, do we think companies are doing enough to sell that?
Within the recommendations that we've got in the study, we talk a bit about actually involving seafarers at every stage, and so that they actually feel very much part of the overall process. But that links to leadership culture. The way in which traditionally maritime is very hierarchical. Is that something that's actually going to work in the future with something like this? I think people need to be able to, yes, they need to understand the regulations. They also need to understand how to interpret them, of course. And that needs partnership, I think, between everybody.
And that sort of brings us around to the safety culture thing there, Kirsten. I'm interested to know from DNV's perspective, because you talked about the importance of that culture. You talked about that, we're raising the bar on the expectations of safety culture and what people will need to do. How do you see the possibilities to kind of codify that into something that could be, for example, put forward to approval to an organisation like CLASS, like DNV?
I think it's related to safety culture. I think it's so important that it's not just another thing, but it's integrated in the way you actually operate. So it must be very close related to, for example, I think that the safety management system is a foundation that is a very great opportunity to create your culture and to influence your culture in your organization. So I think to build in very, incentives in terms of acting safe or acting related to decrease the emissions as well, related to energy efficiency, to have explicit goals on both safety and also decarbonisation, and build this into the safety management system to actually influence your culture in your way.
Yeah, and it's interesting the way those things are kind of interfaced with things like ESG, getting people to actually think about how they prove what they're doing.